Welcome to Toronto Talks, the podcast that brings you the most important stories about money, business, and technology.
Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just looking to stay ahead of the curve, we dive deep into the latest in finance, innovation, and industry.
Hosted by Ash and Sophie the Sage.
We blend human expertise with cutting-edge technology to explore the dynamic world of modern industry
with fearless curiosity and wit.
Let's get started.
Wars today aren't just fought with armies. They're built into economies. Every missile has a price tag, every drone a contract, and every battlefield a balance sheet.
Global defense spending topped $2.7 trillion last year, the sharpest rise since the Cold War. In Europe alone, budgets jumped 17% in a single year. And here in Canada, pressure is mounting for us to finally meet NATO's 2% target. These aren't just numbers, they're signals that conflict has become as much a marketplace as a military endeavour.
And the marketplace is booming. U.S. defense giants captured nearly $800 billion in contracts over the last 5 years. Drone manufacturers are scaling faster than EV startups. Private contractors now handle logistics, training, even frontline support.
The more war takes on the logic of business, the harder it becomes to tell whether leaders are purchasing security or selling it.
That's the tension driving this episode. What happens when conflict is measured less by generals and more by shareholders?
In 2025, war isn't only about who wins, it's also about who cashes in.
I like the way you put that, Sophie. Security as something bought and sold. Let's zoom out for a second. $2.7 trillion in global defense spending, the highest since the Cold War. On paper, that looks like the world is responding to rising threats, but there's more behind a number that big, right? What's really driving it?
It isn't just threats. Defense has become structurally baked into economies. Budgets are sticky. They don't shrink when conflicts end. They roll forward into the next justification. Add to that the politics of signalling. NATO allies proving seriousness, governments flexing deterrence, and the size of the budget itself becomes the measure of security. In Canada, the push to hit 2% isn't about tanks or jets. It's about reputation. That number has become a proxy for credibility, even when our real needs are more complex.
So it's less about readiness and more about sending a signal. And credibility shows up on the battlefield too, right? In Ukraine, some estimates suggest 70 to 80% of casualties now come from drones. That's staggering. What does that shift tell us? Not just tactically, but about the economies of modern war.
Shows the center of gravity has moved from manpower to machines. Drones are cheap compared to armored brigades, quick to deploy and devastatingly effective. They also redirect money towards software firms, AI labs, and nimble startups instead of only the traditional weapons giants. Economically, that makes war more scalable. Lose hundreds of drones and you can replace them far faster than an armoured division. The ethical cost is that killing at scale becomes normalised. It starts to look like hardware losses rather than human lives. And Canadians may not realise it, but our own firms are already feeding into allied drone supply chains.
Yeah, that's sobering. War starting to look more like a tech rollout than a battle. Here at home, it fuels the old debate, right? Canada's been pressed for years to hit NATO's 2% benchmark. Some call us freeloaders, and others say we're spending wisely. How should Canadians think about that tension?
The freeloader line is too simplistic. Canada contributes in ways that don't always show up in budget math. Arctic patrols, intelligence sharing, cyber defense, even our peacekeeping legacy. But allies want the optics of equal effort. For Canadians, the deeper issue is whether matching NATO's number actually makes us safer, or whether it diverts resources from uniquely Canadian vulnerabilities, our infrastructure, our Arctic sovereignty, our disaster readiness. Spending more doesn't always mean spending smart.
That makes me think of Eisenhower's farewell address, his warning about the military-industrial complex. People still quote it, but in 2025, with AI, drones, and private contractors added in, is it even the same thing anymore, or has it grown into something even bigger?
Eisenhower's warning almost feels understated now. In his day, the concern was an alliance between the Pentagon, defense contractors, and lawmakers. Today, the web is far larger. Silicon Valley firms coding targeting systems, logistics companies moving supplies, universities tied to defense research grants. It's not a triangle anymore, it's a web. And webs don't just influence policy, they define what feels possible. That's why spending ratchets upwards so easily. It isn't simply responding to threats. It's a system that profits from its own expansion.
If war is an industry, then someone must be profiting. And the numbers are staggering. In the last 5 years alone, 5 US defense giants, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman, captured nearly $800 billion in Pentagon contracts. That's a third of all US military contracting.
And it isn't just the big names. A whole ecosystem of contractors thrives on logistics, training, cybersecurity, even frontline support. Their revenue grows the longer conflicts drag on, which raises a tough question. Are we building weapons to end wars, or designing wars that never really end?
So in this segment, we're going to follow the money, from Wall Street's defense stock boom to the startups building drones and AI, to Canada's role in NATO supply chains. The question is, who's cashing in?
And maybe the sharper question is, who isn't?
All right, Sophie. So one thing that jumps out to me is how defense stocks keep outperforming the broader market during conflicts. It's almost as if war itself is becoming a bullish signal. That feels disturbing, especially if Canadian pensions are part of it. What explains that performance, and is it ethical for Canadians to benefit from it?
The outperformance is about predictability. Defence is one of the few sectors with guaranteed government-backed demand. Contracts span years, defaults are rare, and crises accelerate the pipeline. So while most industries ride market swings, defence looks steady and investors reward that. The ethical side is trickier. Pension funds, index funds, even universities often hold these stocks, which means teachers, nurses, civil servants may be profiting from war without knowing it. The dividends are real, even if the connection feels abstract. And that forces a question: should retirement security depend, even indirectly, on global insecurity?
That's unsettling. The idea that Canadians are becoming silent stakeholders in war without realizing it. And it makes me think about private contractors. They're now handling supply chains, training, cyber defense, even frontline roles. With so much outsourced, accountability gets messy, right? So when something goes wrong, who's actually responsible? The government or the companies carrying out the mission?
That's the accountability gap at the heart of modern warfare. Governments sign the contracts, but once private firms run logistics or intelligence, the chain of command blurs. If a supply line fails or a drone misfires, who takes the blame? The company, the commander, or the politician who outsourced it? And corporations don't answer to citizens. They answer to shareholders. Their incentive is quarterly results, not national interest. That doesn't mean they're reckless, but it does mean their priorities can drift from public accountability. For Canadians, it's a warning. The more we lean on private firms, the more decisions about national security risk are being shaped in boardrooms as much as in Parliament.
Feels like a grey zone, where nobody's clearly accountable when things go wrong. And that brings up the bigger worry. If defense firms profit the longer conflicts last, doesn't that create an incentive, even unintentionally, to prolong them? Not saying it's a conspiracy, but more like baked-in incentives.
It's less conspiracy than inertia. Once a war starts, almost no one in the defence ecosystem benefits from ending it quickly. Politicians want factories running in their districts, contractors want renewals, investors want steady dividends, local economies become tied to bases and supply chains. That's why Eisenhower's warning feels so relevant. He worried about the alliance of industry, military, and politics shaping national priorities. Today, the network is even wider. Tech firms coding AI, universities chasing grants, private equity funding startups. None of them directly declare war, but all shape the environment in which decisions are made. And the result is drift, conflicts that drag on not because it's wise, but because too many institutions profit from the status quo.
Which makes me wonder how much of that drift touches us in Canada. We're not seen as a defense powerhouse, but we are plugged into NATO's supply chains. So are Canadian firms quietly benefiting from this surge? And if so, how do we balance genuine support for allies with the risk of building our own war dependency?
Canada may not export weapons at scale, but we're not untouched. Our aerospace firms supply components for allied aircraft. Our tech sector has cybersecurity contracts. Even our mining and resource industries contribute metals and rare earths into NATO chains. The concern isn't that Canada is profiting like the US giants. It's that once these contracts exist, they become sticky. Jobs depend on them. MPs fight to keep them. Before long, parts of our economy are tied to conflict continuing, not ending. For Canadians, the challenge is drawing a line. Solidarity with allies matters, but our long-term prosperity can't rest on perpetual war. If it does, we risk losing the identity we built, a country known for peacekeeping, not profiteering.
This episode of Toronto Talks is brought to you by Conquest Distributors, your trusted source for shipping, packaging, and warehouse supplies. For nearly 20 years, they've helped Canadian businesses thrive with fast, reliable service and a commitment to integrity and efficiency. Getting the products you need when you need them has never been easier. Now, let's talk about something real. With the latest round of tariffs coming from south of the border, supporting Canadian manufacturers and supply vendors isn't just good for business, it's good for Canada. So why keep funneling money to US giants like Uline when you can get the same or better quality products right here at home? When you choose Conquest Distributors, you're not just getting top-tier packaging, shipping, and warehouse essentials at competitive prices. You're investing in local businesses, strengthening Canadian supply chains, and keeping economic power here at home where it belongs. With fast, reliable fulfillment, an easy-to-use online store, and a team that genuinely cares about your success, Conquest Distributors proves that Canadian businesses can compete and win on quality and service. And now, to make it even easier, Toronto Talks listeners get to enjoy 15% off their first online order with promo code TALK15. Head on over to conquestdistributors.ca and see for yourself. That's conquestdistributors.ca, your trusted business supply partners. Now, back to the show. War today isn't just fought with weapons, it's fought with algorithms. In 2025, the front line doesn't just stretch across trenches or airspace. It runs through lines of code.
Nowhere is that clearer than in Ukraine, where 70 to 80% of battlefield casualties now come from drones. Not artillery, not infantry. Drones, guided by AI-assisted systems that can spot, track and strike faster than a human ever could.
And drones are only the beginning. Predictive software maps troop movements, cyber tools disable infrastructure, and autonomous vehicles scout ahead. Generals once took days to weigh options. AI can model outcomes in seconds.
That speed changes everything. Wars used to be constrained by political and human cost. When machines take on the risk, conflict can look cheaper and therefore more tempting.
But efficiency comes with a price. Accountability starts to blur. Who's responsible when an algorithm locks onto the wrong target? The coder, the commander, the system itself?
And for Canada, that's the crossroads. Do we step up and shape the ethics of military AI, or inherit systems designed elsewhere along with the risks baked into them?
So the real question isn't whether AI makes war smarter, it's whether it makes it more reckless.
Once algorithms are unleashed, the issue isn't how wars are fought, it's who or what is really in control.
All right, Sophie. So earlier you described how automation lowers costs. If technology makes war cheaper in money and in lives, does that actually make leaders more likely to use force? Do cheaper wars risk becoming more common wars?
That's the danger. Historically, wars carried immense costs. Soldiers' lives, political capital, economic strain. Those costs acted as brakes. If AI reduces casualties on one side and makes weapons cheaper to deploy, the threshold for launching conflict drops. Leaders may convince themselves a limited strike is manageable because machines carry the risk. The irony is that automation only creates the illusion of low-cost war. Collateral damage, escalation, blowback, those don't go away. They just arrive faster.
Right, and that leads to accountability. If an autonomous system misfires, say a drone hits the wrong target, who's on the hook? The coder, the commander, or the government? Do we need a new Geneva Convention for AI?
Existing frameworks were built for human decision makers. They assume intent and judgment flow through a clear chain of command. AI breaks that. If an algorithm misidentifies a target, the programmer never saw the battlefield. The commander may not understand the code, and the government only approved the system, not the strike. That's why ethicists argue for international rules, not just to ban certain weapons, but to mandate meaningful human oversight. Without that, accountability evaporates. And when accountability goes, trust in the rules of war collapses with it.
Feels like uncharted territory, with nobody clearly responsible when things go wrong. That puts Canada in an interesting position. We may not be a military superpower, but we do carry weight in setting standards. Should we lead on ethics for AI in defense, or focus instead on building compatibility so we're not left behind?
Canada has influence in NATO, the UN, and in policy circles. We could lead in ethics, pushing guardrails before the tech outruns regulation. But there's a sovereignty issue too. If we rely entirely on allied systems, we inherit their code and their rules of engagement. That could drag us into conflicts we didn't choose. So the right path is probably hybrid. Develop some capacity to safeguard our interests while leveraging our diplomatic voice to set standards. That's where Canada can punch above its weight.
Yeah, even with standards, misreads happen, right? What if an algorithm mistakes a radar blip or a routine cyber probe for an attack. Could AI spark conflict faster than humans can stop them?
That's the nightmare. Machines react in milliseconds, humans deliberate in hours. That mismatch could trigger what analysts call flash wars, conflicts that ignite not because leaders wanted them, but because systems reacted too fast. We've seen flash crashes in financial markets where trillions disappeared in minutes. Now imagine that dynamic in nuclear command or cyber defense. A single misread could launch retaliation before leaders even know what happened.
And then there's the global race. The US, China, Russia, they're pouring billions into AI weapons. Can smaller nations like Canada realistically keep up? Or do we risk being sidelined on future battlefields?
Smaller nations can't match dollar for dollar, but they can be strategic. The edge in AI isn't just money, it's integration, how well systems fit into doctrine, training, and alliances. Canada doesn't need to build everything, but we do need interoperability with allies and enough domestic expertise to judge what we adopt. There's also strength in specialization. Canada could carve niches, cybersecurity, Arctic surveillance, governance, that give us real influence in coalitions.
That's the practical side. But philosophically, if machines fight machines, what does victory even mean? Is it still about territory and treaties, or does it become something else?
It risks becoming hollow. If two fleets of drones clash and thousands are destroyed, but no soldiers are lost, is that a victory or just broken hardware? Some argue automation could make wars bloodless. Others worry it makes them endless, conflicts grinding on until one economy collapses. In that world, victory isn't about peace or legitimacy. It's about which system outlasts the other. And that's a future where humans stand by while machines decide the outcome.
Every empire has its addictions. For Rome, it was expansion. For Britain, colonies. For America, it may be defense spending. The Pentagon's budget has now crossed the $1 trillion mark. That's more than the next 10 countries combined.
Supporters say it deters aggression, overwhelming power keeps the peace. Critics argue the opposite. The bigger the budget, the bigger the temptation to use it.
So, in this segment, we're asking, is a $1 trillion defense bill the price of security or proof of an addiction we can't quit?
At some point, nations have to ask, are they buying protection or paying for dependence?
Sophie, you've said defense spending often becomes strategy in itself. The US is the clearest example, a budget now beyond $1 trillion. Washington calls it deterrence. The scale of power keeps wars from starting. But others say it sustains a permanent state of readiness. How should we think about that tension? And where does Canada sit in that picture?
Deterrence can work. Overwhelming power can make adversaries hesitate, but it quickly slides into dependence. A $1 trillion budget sustains industries, institutions, and communities that need it to keep flowing. In that sense, the money doesn't just deter conflict, it entrenches the machinery of war itself. For Canada, the contrast is sharp. Our security has long been underwritten by US power. We benefit from their deterrence, but we're also tied to their cycles of spending and their decisions about when and how to use force.
And then there's the flip side, what that money isn't funding. Even a fraction of $1 trillion could transform housing, healthcare, or public education. The opportunity cost is massive. How do we even weigh that? Especially here in Canada, where budgets are smaller, but the trade-offs just as real.
The scale is staggering. Redirecting just 10% of the US defense budget, $100 billion could fund universal pre-K, overhaul infrastructure, or double medical research. These aren't daydreams. Economists have run the numbers. In Canada, the trade-offs are just as sharp. Every dollar funneled toward NATO's 2% target is a dollar not spent on Indigenous healthcare, affordable housing, Arctic infrastructure. It's not abstract, it's lived reality. The choice between preparing for wars we may never fight and addressing crises Canadians face today.
So, even when budgets rise for good reasons, the trade-offs are still very real. And once budgets reach those levels, they rarely shrink. Programs become politically untouchable. Industries lobby to protect contracts, and communities rely on the jobs. It almost feels addictive, right? Is that a fair comparison?
The analogy holds. Once a defense budget expands, it builds its own immune system. Every weapons program has a constituency. Every base anchors jobs. Contractors fund lobbying to keep pipelines alive. So even after wars end, spending rarely falls. And addiction has consequences. Innovation gets skewed toward military tech instead of civilian needs. Politics equates strong defense with big spending, even when strategy doesn't demand it. Eventually, nations lose the ability to imagine scaling back.
That tension plays right into Canada's identity. For decades, we were known for peacekeeping, not rearmament. But today, allies are urging us to spend more on modernization. Do we double down on that peacekeeping legacy or accept that the world has changed?
It's a defining crossroads. Peacekeeping gave Canada credibility and soft power beyond our size. Rearmament may feel like the fast way to prove relevance, but it risks erasing what made us distinct. Peacekeeping today doesn't look like it did in the 1980s. It's less about blue helmets and more about cyber defense, stabilization, disaster response. But the principle, investing in stability rather than escalation, still sets us apart. If we pour billions into mimicking US-style militarization, we could end up less secure and less respected.
And there's the moral layer, right? Can a democracy really claim to defend itself if it spends more on weapons than on the well-being of its own people?
Exactly. Security isn't only about borders and weapons. It's about trust, cohesion, and citizens' well-being. A democracy where people can't afford healthcare or housing is vulnerable no matter how many jets it buys. For Canadians, the takeaway is clear. Our security depends as much on social cohesion as on military readiness. Lose that balance, and we risk weakening the very democracy we're trying to protect.
Here are the top 6 reasons why smart Toronto businesses choose Conquest over Uline. We were going to do a top 5 list, but truth is, doing a little extra is kind of our thing. Number 6, we offer free shipping. Uline doesn't. I mean, it doesn't really get any simpler than that, does it? Number 5, we've got 35 5-star Google reviews from real customers. They've got Yelp, Trustpilot, and Glassdoor reviews that read like corporate horror fiction. Number 4, we're actually in the GTA. Uline, they're out in Milton, aka delivery purgatory. We ship like your time matters, because it does. Number 3, we are proudly all Canadian. Our customers, suppliers, even our platform, Uline, they're one of America's biggest employers. Stars and stripes to the core. Number 2, our carbon footprint is essentially non-existent. Remote operations, no warehouses, and definitely no junk mail catalogs from the Jurassic period. And reason number 1, Uline infamously offer their free hats and barbecue sauce. We, on the other hand, offer real savings, fast service, and actual value. After everything that we've unpacked tonight, the budgets, the drones, the algorithms, the profits, one reality stands out. War isn't just about power or politics. It's about markets. Entire economies are structured around conflict, which means peace isn't only a moral choice, it's an economic disruption.
War consumes more than lives. It devours balance sheets. Once billions flow into defense contracts, those flows harden into habits. Industries depend on them, jobs rely on them, politicians campaign on them. In that world, peace doesn't look like stability. It looks like recession.
That may be the most dangerous paradox. The system meant to protect us has a stake in keeping us afraid.
But markets can be redirected. The same trillions mobilized for weapons could be channeled into healthcare, housing, or technologies that uplift instead of destroy. The obstacle isn't capability, it's will.
History shows us that it can be done. After World War II, economies didn't just collapse when tanks stopped rolling, right? They shifted from wartime production to peacetime prosperity. The Marshall Plan and the GI Bill turned resources towards stability. Peace was profitable because it was structured to be.
That's the decision before us now, as Canadians, as allies, as global citizens. Do we keep treating war as the safest investment, or finally build a business case for peace?
Markets follow incentives. Reward arms races and you'll get more of them.
Shift the incentives toward cooperation, resilience, and stabilization. The trajectory changes. $1 trillion peace budget is as possible as $1 trillion defense budget. The constraint isn't economics, it's imagination.
That may sound idealistic.
So did abolishing slavery, so did universal suffrage, so did ending apartheid. Every breakthrough began as an impossibility until people decided it wasn't.
So the real question isn't whether peace is possible. It's whether we're willing to pay for it. Not just in dollars, but in creativity, in courage, in persistence.
Because narratives shape markets. If our story says security only comes from bigger bombs and faster drones, that's where capital will flow. But if we tell a different story, one about stability, dignity, and trust, money will follow that path instead.
And perhaps Canada has a unique role here. We're not a superpower, but we can model something different.
Canada's strength isn't raw firepower, it's reputation, punching above our weight with diplomacy, ideas, and balance. Reclaiming that matters, because if we trade it away for military parity, what do we really gain?
That's the ledger we rarely calculate. Not just the cost of war in dollars or lives, but the cost of peace foregone.
The real danger isn't overspending on war. It's forgetting that other ways of spending even exist.
So, here we stand, in an era where war is both tragedy and enterprise. The choice for Canada and for the world is simple. Keep cashing the checks of fear or start investing in the dividends of peace.
The true cost of war isn't just measured in casualties or contracts. It's measured in what goes unbuilt, what remains unhealed, what never gets imagined, because we were too busy preparing to fight.
Maybe the greater challenge of our time is to build an economy where peace isn't a pause between wars, but a sustainable system in itself.
War exposes what we value most. If we keep treating it as an industry, it will define us. If we invest in peace instead, it might just save us.
Next time on Toronto Talks, we leave the battlefield and step into the yoga studio, and the pharmacy aisle, and the smartwatch on your wrist. The wellness boom has become a $6 trillion juggernaut, and we're asking, is it actually making us healthier or just poorer?
The fight for the future isn't only in trenches or skies, it's in our bodies, in our choices, in how we measure health and what we're willing to buy to feel safe.
That's next week. But for now, remember this. War will always test nations. The greater test is what we build in its absence.
And the only victory that truly matters is the one that makes war obsolete.
that's it for the show. Like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and reach out to us anytime at talk@torontotalks.ca. We'll see you next time right here on Toronto Talks, where big ideas come to life
And curiosity never sleeps.